some.
Yeah, that's good. I'll sit next to Lena, and then you'll be next to Sandra, and then Lena and I can see you.
So I see it. All right. Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
I'll start by reading this. And we have accessibility.
Good on the mic. Hello.
1, 2.
Tina.
This is Ralph Rensler, director of the Smithsonian Bicentennial Folklife Festival. If you enjoyed the festival, you'll be interested in this invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, an opportunity like this cannot be taken for granted.
This evening, we are going to be beating our hearts out for you all, so I want to see people enjoying themselves. So get up and feel the music and do something about it, okay?
This event is a right of cultural democracy.
We have many, many partners, you included. I encourage you to stand alongside with us as we travel this journey year after year.
Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to our discussion, Structures, Tradition, and Innovation in UAE Architecture. Before we begin our conversation and I introduce our panelists, I'd like to read an announcement pertaining to this event. To welcome you to the 2022 Smithsonian Folklife Festival, produced by the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, co-presented by the UAE Embassy, and co-sponsored by the National Park Service. For over 50 years, the festival has convened people on the National Mall to explore, exchange, and engage the power of culture and creativity in our lives today. This year, in addition to the UAE, we also feature Earth Optimism. Make sure to check out both programs and our marketplace. Then add your festival stories to ours by using hashtag 2022 Folklife. This festival is made possible by people like you. Visit festival.si.edu to join our community of contributors. We also frequently receive federal appropriated funds, Smithsonian Trust funds, contributions from governments, businesses, foundations, and individuals, in-kind assistance, and food, recording, and craft sales. This year, additional support is provided by the Tima Shiv Family Foundation. Promotional support is provided by the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the UAE Ministry of Culture and Youth, and the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C. Additional support is provided by Etihad Airways. The festival strives to maintain an accessible and inclusive environment for visitors of all abilities. If you are in need of accessible seating options or assistive listening during this presentation, please see our venue manager, volunteer wearing an Ask Me sign for assistance button. Detailed accessibility information about all of our festival accessibility, including ASL interpretation, audio description, real-time captioning, and a variety of other services, can be found on our festival website or by visiting the accessibility information table located on the volunteer tent. And before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to please visit the festival marketplace over by the National Museum of Asian Art, directly over there, and support the artisans from all around the world. And please don't miss out on the delicious festival bites by stopping by our food concessions for a meal, snack, or drink. Okay, thank you for listening to that. And before further ado, let me introduce this panel. The session is in part of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates Living Landscape, Living Memory, where we are exploring cultural knowledge and the environment. Today, our conversation, Structures, Tradition, and Innovation, fits into the program's theme of place, in which we seek to understand relationships with the environment, including both how the desert ecosystem and urban setting are shaping the UAE culture. Some of the questions that we'll be exploring are, what can traditional building techniques teach us about sustainability and living together? This conversation will explore traditional renewable architecture as well as modern built heritage, and how these ways of building can inspire more sustainable approaches to the urban fabric. My name is Michelle Bambling. I'm co-curator of the UAE program, along with Rebecca Fenton, my counterpart with the Smithsonian Institution. And I have the pleasure to introduce my colleagues and friends, long-term friends. I'll begin with Lina Ahmed and Marco Sosa, and I'll introduce them together because their work is highly collaborative. They're both architects and faculty members of Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. Marco has published a book of photographs of the UAE's oldest mosque, Al-Babida Mosque. They are both experts in the Middle East modern architectural heritage, and they have published widely on that subject. They explore design pedagogies and also various other topics that they'll be introducing to you today. They have, with their students, created a remarkable installation. So if you enter into the festival site and proceed all the way to the end where the place is, you will see a large and impressive and unusual structure, which is an evocation of a courtyard house based on an actual adaptable heritage project in the town of Al Ain by the oasis in the desert, and that they will tell you more about through this discussion. I would also like to welcome Sandra Pizik, who's here remotely on the screen. So nice to see you, Sandra. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Sandra is an important expert of the vernacular heritage, architectural heritage in the UAE. She is an architect. She's also an expert in sustainable architecture globally. She has extensively studied specifically the Arish palm frond architecture building in the UAE. She's author of numerous volumes, including Arish and Habitat, Vernacular Architecture for a Changing Planet. So we would like to start our conversation, but I was just thinking when I was pulled in as moderator this morning, I realized that this is a reunion because we first worked together in 2014 when I was curating at the Venice Biennale, the UAE Architecture Pavilion. And at that time, I worked closely with Marco and also with Sandra for developing content around the very topics that we're exploring today, more than a decade later, here on the National Mall of Washington, D.C. So with that in mind, let's think about the sort of retrospective approach and the future building of these very ideas. And I thought rather than having it as a Q&A, it might be best if we just started as an informal conversation and then open this up to the audience to respond and to ask us questions. I'd like to ask maybe Lena and Marco, just because it's the most present, to talk a little bit about their project here. And then that might be a wonderful way for Sandra to build in on what you all cannot see, which is the intangible heritage and also the ephemerality of Arish architecture, and how that actually is highly sustainable and enduring in innovative ways today.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and also thank you, Michelle, for inviting us for this, to have this conversation, but also to invite us to be part of the festival. For us, it's a great honor, and for our students as well, to disseminate the research that we've been doing for the past 2 years in the city of Al-Ain, and trying to showcase and highlight little structures like the house we are exhibiting, which is a courtyard house, normally known as a Beit al-Kubaisi. Beit stands for house in Arabic. We basically, maybe I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how it all developed. And Lena, please step in. It started as a project for a course, a very, very, very boring course, which was to teach our students CAD software. And Lena and I are always coming out with interesting ideas to make these very practical skills that the students have to learn in the interior design program at Zayed University, to make them something very interesting, and also to form some sort of part of a bigger piece of research body, which is what we did initially in the 2014 when we were involved with Michelle's contribution to the National Pavilion, UAE, in the Venice Biennale. So we started looking at, thanks to another senior student, she's here today, Zainab Al-Bluki, and she was very proactive, and she got in contact with a group called DCT, which is stands for Abu Dhabi Tourism and Culture Department, and they looked after all the treasures, all the national treasures around it, wherever it's tangible or intangible, and wherever it is traditional or modern heritage or very kind of ancient heritage, anything, they will look after it. So she made the initial contact, and then we talked to Peter Sheeham, who's the person in charge, he's an archaeologist, I believe, and he's the one in charge of maintaining some of these properties. And apparently there's loads of them in Al-Ain. We were fortunate enough to see them. This is the house that you featured here is one of the first examples of concrete being used in the UAE in the late 1950s, early 60s, along with another house called Mohammed bin Zayed, which has recently been renovated and turned into a cultural center. That house, the Mohammed bin Zayed, it belonged to the royal family, to the sheikhs, to Al Nahyan family. So it was very obvious, how they could actually turn it. But for us, what the DCT encountered is that the normal houses for the normal families, although they rescue them and they stop them from decaying, is often difficult to understand or to envisage what they could be used for. So this is when Lena and I had the idea of, why don't we research this house and then actually bring it into the studio and by the way, our students are interior designers, they're not architect students. So, but we try to show our students and we teach them something that goes beyond interior decoration, which is often what people have a misconception of what interior design is. Lena, you want to take on?
So the whole story started in a CAD class in 2019 where we were teaching students Autodesk software, and we had on our hands an interesting tool which was the 3D scanner, and we thought after teaching them the basics, we sought out opportunities of how to involve them in a real life projects and teach them how, or show them an example of how to apply practical skills to existing solutions. So following up, like Marcus said, we took the students on a trip to Al-Ain. The house, Al-Qubaisi house, is located in Al-Ain, and Al-Ain is a city in the Emirates of Abu Dhabi. It happens to be 2 hours away from where our campus is located. So we took them on a 2-day trip where they spent 2 days in the house, These two girls were there, but also their classmates. The entire team was there, about, I would say, 20 months, so to speak. We spent 2 days there scanning the building and also using the traditional means of recording Al Qubaisi House. And that was how the project unfolded as a start in class. So there was a lot of preparation work that happened before we went to the trip of teaching the students how to use this technology and software, and also instill in them why is it important to document this house? What are we gaining from that? And then going to the site, doing the actual work, and then the post-production process that happened after that. Now, what was interesting is that we found, even though it started as a technical project in a CAD class, we found ourselves that we have had almost one of the best examples of site analysis that we could have had with these students. And we decided to take a step further. So the project extended beyond that semester to the following one, where we brought it back into a studio class and introduced to the students the notion of adaptive reuse, which is, it's very common in many cities, but in UAE it's very uncommon because a lot of old buildings get demolished and are not recorded. So we asked the 25 students what could happen in this house. How do you see this house become? What's the future of this house? How do you see this house becoming part of tomorrow? Yes, we documented it and we have a documentation of it, but then what's next? And I think we ended the semester with every single student's example of a provision of how she sees this house becoming part of her future as a future interior designer.
Thank you very much. And now let's move over and talk to Sandra about a very different material, a different approach to architecture, and the connection between the traditional approaches and contemporary and future aspirations for architecture and materiality.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks to technology. Such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for honorable invitation. And I'm also delighted to share the stage with friends, Professor Marcus Souza, Lina, and of course, Michelle and Rebecca. A huge thank you for a very kind invitation. My story in the UAE started in 2004. I went there as an architect building Dubai and truly curious to try to find out what happened before we arrived with perhaps different style of architecture. And the curiosity led me to review of over 80,000 square kilometers of UAE, trying to understand a puzzle of different landscapes, beautiful landscapes, a desert landscape, mountain landscape, coastal landscapes, and what happened there before and how people responded with a great ingenuity to local climatic conditions, hence the story of date palm. And before I touch this on the aspect of structures of the UAE, I just wanted to tell a little bit about the Oasis ecosystems, because what I've learned there was probably a genesis of urbanization, a moment understanding how cities grow, which was always an availability of drinking water, agriculture, and then a city, and then urbanization. So till today, this self-sustainable model creates an endless inspiration, particularly post-corona situation, when we talk about urbanization and agriculture. The Oasis cities forever will stay with us as a perfect model of self-sustainable unit. And where architecture happened, so it happened in twofold. One was buildings from mud, depending on where we were in the world, and I also mentioned perhaps a UN MENA region. But also people built buildings from date palm. And it was a perfect circular economy model, or we could call it today a regenerative economy model. And throughout UAE, we definitely see structures adaptable to climate zones or to microclimates within the UAE itself. And these structures effectively captured wind, whether at the high level, which was through Barjils, or at the low level in areas of Ras Al Khaimah. Now, the evolution of this architecture is hugely important. And traditionally, this evolution is being divided in terms of technology into low tech, which is something that craftsmen and people people do by hand, into intermediate technology, where we could, with a little bit of engineering, expand the capacities of materials. And I was very fortunate to build one building in LA called the Sabla Primary Shelter, that we expanded the use of this material from, say, 10 meters square to 500 meters square. And of course, there is a knowledge economy and developed technology. And we always ask the question, for example, how parametric computer modeling can fit into it. So the future, I believe it's hybrid in terms of the use of materials, trying to find a way of mixing these traditional materials with contemporary materials. But above all, I think research and development is hugely important. And here the role of the universities and academia and also government will be really, really important. And the final thought that I think is also perhaps worth to mention, whilst we are all architects here on the stage, is the stylistic evolution that some of these materials need to undergo, and the aspect of evolution in architecture in general. So this is perhaps in a nutshell what I would like to say. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I'd also like to take a moment to think about the context and where we were having this discussion. This is on the National Mall of the United States, and we're introducing the United Arab Emirates, Living Memory, Living Landscapes, and we're looking out at the first built structure for the festival and its long history of 50 years. So we built this structure here. And we could have put together any kind of design, but we decided to work with architects to use architectural language to embed in the DNA of the structure references to the traditional architecture. For example, the narrow width of this long building is based on the width of a mangrove pole, which was more or less standard in the width of the tree and the way in which it was bundled and shipped and traded. So if you go along this structure, you will find one stall that says Emirati Home. And there are 3 mangrove poles that actually came from Arish structures in Abu Dhabi that were saved when those structures came down. If you go to Abu Dhabi today, you won't see Arish buildings along the coastline. It's such an incredibly rapid development of the city. It transforms so very quickly. And we want to show these layers and not lose that cultural knowledge. So there's a reference point here in the narrowness of the design. It's also specific because we are building this structure next to what is the national park. As you all know, this is national park land. So we wanted to remove the impact of the foot traffic a little bit to this hardscape to have a narrow design. If you look at the silhouette of the structure, you'll see that it switches in between a slanted structure roof and a vertical. That vertical is reference to the wind tower structures, which were ways in which pre-air conditioning times, there was a downdraft that funneled through the courtyard house, which is what you see with Marco and Lena and their students' work, the courtyard house, a passive cooling system. And Masdar today, which is an innovative project in the UAE, is developing upon those strategies. This also references the souks that were built of Arish, but also there was coral stone architecture. So the natural available resources, not only in the desert and the oasis towns of Arish that Sandra was speaking of, but along the coastal ways, they would withdraw coral and use the coral stone to actually build these structures. Now that's endangered material and it's no longer practiced. If you look over there at the mural, you'll see bright, beautiful colors. It's again a collaborative contemporary design, and many of those motifs are actually observed by the students of the rapid city structures, their cement barriers, cones. I'm looking right now at actually a wind tower. So throughout this festival, we're trying to show the way in which the traditional knowledge was developed in response to living and surviving in the harsh community of the environment of the UAE, along the coast and the seas, also in the mountains, and the creativity that came out of that. And that continues to inspire people, such as Sandro's talking about innovative use of Arish, and you all how to further knowledge and sustainability practice by studying these past. A question, please. Or a comment, please. So, Marco and Lena, maybe you can answer this because you have a model and images. The question is, do you have images of these structures?
If you go directly to in front of the National Museum, we have an installation of the Al-Qubaisi house itself, and we have a model. So if you come there, either myself or our students can show you around and explain to you how it worked.
And one other comment I'd like to make is that the very first stall, when one enters, is on the modulus. So the modulus, the history of that structure, how it brought communities together for conversations about what's important amongst people, that architecturally and in terms of interior design evolved, but the essence of it remains. So throughout these stalls and throughout these various installations, you will see elements of architecture in a cultural context.
And just to add one thing, also if you can come back tomorrow, we'll have the VR setting. We didn't bring it today because there's a rain forecast. And through the VR, we can transport you to the house as well.
We can take you to Alain.
Yeah. And the same thing for the modulus, they use augmented reality. So there are experimentations in how to bridge tradition and innovation and to carry out the knowledge and move it forward.
What was interesting about the whole and the way it was curated by Rebecca and Michelle, the whole festival, is that it allowed not just for the traditional, which is super important, but also for the present and the future. And for us to be able to, like my colleague Dina Hempel and Slavan from American University of Sharjah, and us and our students to actually experiment on what do we do with this tradition? Because one thing is, what we don't want to do is look at it in almost like a precious object that shouldn't be touched. We're designers, we're interior architects, and we want to, our purpose is to actually bring life to a lot of these buildings and to integrate them to the local community and find some sort of architectural solution in which they can actually carry on working either as they intended or find a completely new use that fits the 21st century.
Sandra, would you like to comment?
Yes, absolutely. Just talking about a presentation of United Arab Emirates in America in such a prestigious place, and I really congratulate all that work on the project so hard. But next year, United Arab Emirates is going to host UNFCCC COP28, which is a global climate change event, the most important one that happens annually. And I think that it is hugely important to say that this evolution of technology that we're talking about has a role in climate change and in sustainability. The IPCC report, the sixth assessment report, is telling us that the region is predicted to be the increase of temperature is supposed to be around 8 degrees Celsius, in addition to what is there right now. So all these investigations that Marco and Lina are trying to do, or architects are trying to do on the ground, are really important for the livability of the region, of trying to find sustainable, passive, urban and architecture solutions for the future.
Thank you. And earlier, when I was mentioning this as a reunion, our other team members right here, Adina Hempel, and it is Adina Hempel who has worked with her colleagues and her students on the modulus stall that we just talked about. She'll be speaking on stage as well. And Adina, would you like to say any comments or bring? So she's pursuing a methodology also of working with her students and collaborating in terms of inter-university education. And this is something very active in the UAE. It's a small enough place that we can do this together in effective ways. Do we have any other questions or comments? Yes, Casper?
Hello, thank you. You've all mentioned creative strategies, asking questions, broad questions, more often than not, about some harsh environment, some perseverance that's being undertaken in the UAE. And now we are transported here onto the National Mall of the Washington. So I was wondering what would be perhaps the most exciting thing about curating, about bringing the mangrove pole structure into life. How would you conceptualize this? And if you can just share the most kind of exciting thing that happened to you throughout this curation process. Thank you.
For us, I think we were trying to envisage how do we bring the idea of the house of the Beit Al Kubaisi to the site, and we know how it exists in its physicality, but we immersed ourselves in it through virtually with the point cloud model and also through VR technology. So we were trying to figure out how can we actually bring it to the mall itself, and the idea that we had was to actually use the model, the digital model, and slice it and represent it at 1-to-1. So if you go and see it, what you see is actually the scale of the prints are human scale. So you can actually almost feel yourself being within the courtyard itself, the facades that are forming the courtyard, but in the back. Instead of having the back facades, we decided that we would show what happens in those rooms, which is a situation we don't normally see once the building is finished, especially building built during that period, and then by bringing it into the mall, we also decided to respect its positioning and its orientation. Now, Washington has a particular grid that follows. And same as in Abu Dhabi and in Al-Ain and in Dubai, they have a certain particular grids, well, especially in Abu Dhabi and Al-Ain. And, but the only buildings that slightly have their own orientation, or slightly dislocated, if you are actually the mosques, which are facing Mecca. And Beit Al Kubaisi actually is following that orientation. So we thought when we bring it was very important for us to actually keep that orientation to allow the house to have its own dignity and presence while it actually sits in the mall itself. So if you see it, you're going to see it's slightly off. It looks like it's pointing towards the Natural History Museum, but having the Natural History Museum as its background as well for us is something completely different. And the installation itself is showing different things that we were not expecting, like the levels of transparency, light, interaction with the trees. Lina, I don't know if you want to.
And just to add to that, the way we represented the sections and the elevation wasn't the traditional way, so we didn't draw them. We used technology and point cloud data to generate them. And then we printed them on canvas that was semi-transparent. So I think seeing them one-to-one, seeing them here in the site, and seeing how they change with the weather condition, with the passers, with the leaves, and having that almost, I would say, subtle inhabitation of the space, I think it's very exciting to see.
Thank you. Sandra, would you like to add to this, or from your own perspective?
No, I think it's, I can add, in a sense, I'm enjoying with my friends listening to the various uses of technology that we can apply to transform cultural heritage. And I think we need more of this experimentation on various materialities of the UAE culture, whether it's date palm, whether it's mud architecture or coral that is no longer used. But I think this is that level of experimentation that is hugely needed to deliver a future of architecture that undoubtedly will be hybrid.
Okay. I would like to just add to from the curatorial perspective, this festival was actually planned for 2019, and because of the pandemic, we had to all change the way we live and work. And so we had some benefits to that, which was to be able to have sustained conversations and grow the content. And the way in which we were able to grow it, taking advantage of remote work, was to bring more people in. So for all the people that you see here on the festival, and we've actually have over 100 people from the Emirates here, we have many more behind them many of the students from various cohorts that worked together to build that project. We couldn't have done that in 4 months, and there are numerous projects like that. We wouldn't have been able to have Sandra with us today, perhaps, and that's something to think about. Also, I think we should think about the power of language and culture, whether you're an architect or not. We all care about the environment. It's important to all of our futures. And our curatorial question is, what kind of world do we want to create together? We have to face this together. So you can see that from various disciplines and perspectives, we're trying to explore and communicate through artistic language as well as architectural structures. Even tonight, this is a plug for Please Come Out, weather providing. We have a wonderful presentation of music, dance, poetry. It's called Live from the Streets, Urban Culture in the UAE. So clearly that's connected to the conversation we have here this morning. So all these interrelationships are of great value and important for exploring the meaning of culture. And just to echo what Sandra just said, that which is non-lasting and lasting, tangible, ephemeral, is also very much a part of the urban world. So we've tried to record voices of people in our soundscapes talking about their experience of being in the UAE. We hope that people will get a sense of not only the UAE, but how the UAE is not so far away, how we're all very closely connected. In that closing note, I know we're running close out of time, but we have a few more minutes. Would anyone else like to? Thank you.
This concerns one of work of modern architecture in Dubai. I'm trying to find out, they have a abandoned science museum over by the Dubai Frame. Do you know where that is?
Yes.
With the domes on it. And I'm trying to figure out, it's just sitting there abandoned. Do they have any plans for that building? Or was the Museum of the Future an effective replacement for that museum? I'm just wondering what they're going to do with it, that building over by the Dubai Frame. Yeah, thanks. I know they're talking about green architecture, but they have a brand new expensive Museum of the Future, and then they have this abandoned Dubai Frame. I'm just wondering what they plan to do with it. Thanks.
I'm actually not familiar with, I know it's the frame. You talk about the frame? I didn't know it was abandoned. I thought it was...
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know anything about that? Adina, do you know anything about that? Oh.
No, but thank you for that comment, because
you
know we are going to look into that when we get back. I'm sure that there are plans. The various governmental initiatives are very conscious of their layers of urban heritage, architectural heritage, and it's probably on their radar in long-term planning.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for that question. Okay. Any other comments? I know it's hot, and we thank you all for sitting here all this time and joining this conversation. And just on closing, I would like to ask us to offer a round of... Was there a question?
There's a lady here.
Oh, so sorry. Please.
I was just curious if you could talk a bit more about the difference of the challenges you're meeting in urban versus rural, or in different microclimates, based on the environmental challenges.
That's a great question. Sandra, you might be able to address that.
Yeah.
That's in your wheelhouse.
I think the challenge is that right now,